The moment I stepped inside the courtroom, I saw my parents already waiting, their smiles sharp and icy, the same kind that used to freeze me in fear when I was little. They looked convinced the victory was theirs before a single word was spoken. Why wouldn't they be? To the world, they were the dazzling Whitmores from television, adored, admired, untouchable, while I was merely the daughter they'd discarded 2 decades earlier. But the rules of this game had changed. My grandfather, the only person who had ever truly cared for me, had passed away, leaving every cent of his billion-dollar fortune to me alone. Now, the very people who abandoned me at his doorstep were dragging me to court to take it back. Standing before the judge, I could feel my pulse beating so loud it seemed to echo off the marble walls. He lifted his gaze, studying me carefully. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, and then, with a stunned tremor in his voice, he said, "Wait, you're her?" The silence that followed was deafening. My parents' polished confidence fractured as the truth they'd buried for years began to surface. I was only 5, the day they vanished from my world. The Santa Barbara sun was merciless that afternoon, blazing, relentless, scorching everything except the hollow chill inside me. My mother, Victoria, crouched in front of me, her white summer dress fluttering, the scent of lilac clinging to her like a lie. "Be good for Grandpa, all right, sweetheart?" she said, her forced smile trembling at the edges. Her lipstick looked too bright, her eyes too dry. My father, Charles, leaned against the car, drumming his fingers on the hood. "Vic, come on. We'll miss the flight." "Flight?" I asked, grabbing her dress with my small hand. "Where are you going? Can I come?" For a heartbeat, she froze. "It's just a quick trip, darling. We'll be back soon." But even as a child, I caught the crack in her voice. She didn't hug me. Instead, she leaned close enough for her earrings to brush my cheek, kissing the air beside my face. Her heels clicked away like a clock ticking down. The car door slammed, tires crunched against gravel, and their silver convertible vanished behind the iron gates. I chased after it until my breath tore in my chest, until my legs gave up. The smell of dust and gasoline hung heavy in the air. I called out to them, but only the wind and faraway seagulls answered. Then a steady hand rested on my shoulder, firm, kind, familiar. Grandpa Henry knelt beside me, his presence quiet but solid. He never spoke in haste. His words always carried meaning. His gray eyes gentled as he brushed the dirt from my knees. "They don't understand what they've lost, my dear," he whispered, his voice trembling with sorrow and love. He paused, tilting my chin upward until our eyes met. "You'll never be unwanted again," he said softly, before lifting me into his arms as if I were weightless and carrying me back toward the mansion. My head rested on his shoulder, and the rhythm of his heartbeat steadied the fear still pulsing inside me. That was the first moment that felt safe all day. Later that night, I sat in the vast kitchen, my legs swinging above the tiled floor while he stood by the stove making cocoa himself. No staff, no formality, just him. "Extra marshmallows, right?" he asked, smiling faintly. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. When he tucked me into bed, the house seemed too large, too still. The slow, steady tick of the grandfather clock echoed like the footsteps of people who would never return. "Will they come back?" I whispered. He hesitated, then ran a gentle hand through my hair. "Some doors, my dear Emma once closed, should remain shut." Before switching off the lamp, he added quietly, "You'll never have to chase love again. From now on, it lives right here." In the dim light, I clung to his hand and believed every word. That was the night I stopped waiting for my parents and started belonging to someone who truly stayed. Life with Grandpa Henry bore no resemblance to the movies about billionaires. His estate perched on the cliffs of Santa Barbara, gazing out over the Pacific like a silent sentinel. Inside, though, there were no lavish galas or servants bustling about. The rhythm of the house was calm, precise, and filled with meaning. Every morning at 6, his gentle knock woke me. "Up, Emma. The world doesn't wait for those who linger," he'd remind me. I would shuffle to the kitchen, where he sat already with black coffee and the morning paper spread wide. "Read this," he'd say, tapping a headline. "Then tell me what they're not telling us." At first, I barely understood, a little girl trying to finish her breakfast. But over time, his lesson unfolded. Never believe a story just because it's printed. Truth, he said, hides beneath the surface, waiting for those who dare to dig for it. He was the founder of Whitmore Industries, a vast network of shipping and logistics that tied nations together. Yet to him, integrity always outweighed wealth. Money, he'd often say, is like salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. So make sure what you crave is worth it. I watched the world bend toward him, politicians eager for his handshake, lawyers seeking his wisdom, employees driven not to disappoint. He ruled with fairness, never cruelty, his authority quiet but absolute. When I turned 10, he finally brought me to his office. The glass towers downtown shimmered under the fading light, glowing like the future he was preparing me to inherit. Inside the building, every person greeted him with quiet respect, and me with cautious curiosity. "This is my granddaughter," he announced, pride in his tone. "Someday, she'll ask tougher questions than any of you." His hand rested gently on my shoulder, and I smiled, shy but certain. He wasn't preparing me to inherit power. He was teaching me how to see the truth beneath appearances. Every weekend, we'd drive to the community center he'd built. While other tycoons sent checks and posed for cameras, Grandpa stayed for hours, kneeling beside children as they learned to read or showing teenagers how to manage their first savings. "Power means nothing," he often whispered, "if you use it only to stand above others." When I turned 16, I saw my parents' faces again, glowing on a television screen. They were laughing on a Los Angeles red carpet, promoting a new reality show about redemption. My hands tightened around the remote until my knuckles turned white. Grandpa came in quietly, his eyes following the flickering image. "Do you miss them?" he asked. The truth trembled on my lips, but what came out was softer. "Not anymore." He gave a slow nod. "Good. Missing those who left is like staring at closed doors. You'll miss the ones still open." That night, he handed me a small worn journal bound in brown leather. "For your truth," he said. "One day the world will try to change it. Don't let them." I had no idea then that this book would become my shield, the evidence that would one day protect me when my parents tried to erase me in court. The morning he passed away, the world felt unsteady. The air hung still, the sea below the cliffs too calm. I found him in his study, his head bowed over his desk, glasses still perched above an open page. The final line he'd written read, "Truth, in the wrong hands, turns to poison." I didn't cry at first. I just stood frozen, staring at the man who had filled every void in my life. Then the grief broke through, sharp and relentless. His funeral gathered the city's elite, magnates, judges, even ex-presidents, all eager to be seen honoring Henry Whitmore, the man who built an empire on integrity. But I wanted none of that. I just wanted one more hour with him, one more of his lessons, one more warm cup of cocoa on a rainy evening. And then I saw them. My parents stood near the front, dressed in sleek black, faces hidden behind designer sunglasses. My mother, Victoria, dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her tears as artificial as her smile. My father, Charles, looked detached, impatient, like the service was keeping him from something better. When the ceremony ended, they came toward me, the first time in 22 years. "Emma," my mother said softly, tilting her head, "you've grown so much." I took a step back, meeting her painted face with a steady gaze. "You remembered my name." Her smile faltered for a second before she forced it back. "We're family," she said lightly. "We should reconnect." "Family?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You left me with him like I was baggage too heavy to keep." Charles' expression hardened, his jaw clenching. "You always did have a flair for drama." Before I could reply, Henry's attorney, Mr. Samuel Briggs, appeared in the doorway and announced that everyone should gather in the estate office for the reading of the will. A low murmur rippled through the guests as they filed inside. My pulse pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Samuel cleared his throat and began to read. the late Judge Henry Whitmore leaves all properties, including the Whitmore residence, corporate assets and financial holdings, to his granddaughter, Emma Whitmore. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother gasped audibly. "That's not possible," she stammered. Charles slammed his hand on the polished table. He was old. He wasn't in his right mind. But Samuel didn't waver. He also left a written message for his son and daughter-in-law, he said, his tone steady. It reads, "Those who abandon truth for comfort have already surrendered their inheritance." Victoria's lips trembled. "He can't do this. We're his children." Samuel met her eyes without flinching. "He already gave you everything that mattered, a chance to be decent. You chose to waste it." I stood motionless, my fingers gripping the table's edge until they ached. For the first time, I saw my parents stripped bare, their polish gone, their charm unraveling in front of everyone. When the crowd began to drift away, my mother turned toward me, her voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this, Emma. You don't deserve a single piece of what he built." I met her stare evenly. "Neither do you." Outside, the wind roared through the gates, scattering white petals from the funeral wreaths across the gravel. In that moment, I understood that grief and greed often arrive together, and in the whisper of the wind, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice. "Stand tall, Emma. The truth always reaches back." It began again a week later, with a thick white envelope waiting on my doorstep. No sender, just my name written in bold, unmistakable handwriting, Emma Whitmore. I tore it open, expecting sympathy cards. Instead, my eyes froze on the heading, Notice of Civil Action. Below it, the words hit like a blade. Charles and Victoria Whitmore versus Emma Whitmore, claim of undue influence. For several seconds, I couldn't move. My hands trembled so violently that the papers slipped from my grasp. My own parents were taking me to court, accusing me of deceiving the only man who had ever loved me into giving me everything he owned. Within hours, the story exploded. By evening, every headline screamed the same scandal. Billionaire's granddaughter sued by estranged parents for $1.6 billion estate. Paparazzi swarmed outside the gates, camera flashes slicing through the dark like bursts of lightning. Early the next morning, my attorney, Robert Hayes, called. His voice carried that practiced calm only years in chaos could teach. "Emma, they're moving quickly. The filing's in Los Angeles County. Your father still has friends there." "Of course he does," I muttered. "He always had power, just never the kind that counted." Later that day, I met Robert in his downtown office. He pushed a stack of documents across the desk. "They're alleging you cut off your grandfather's visitors, interfered with his medical care, and pressured him to change his will." A sharp laugh escaped me. Controlled access? He was protecting me from them, not the other way around. Robert exhaled slowly. "I've handled ugly estate disputes, but parents suing their own daughter? That's a first." "They're not my parents," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're strangers tied to me by DNA." Still, my thoughts drifted to Grandpa's final weeks, the soft-spoken dinners, his weary smile, the tremor in his hand when he signed letters. Did he foresee this coming? Maybe that's why he left the journal. Maybe he knew I'd need it. 2 days later, as I left a cafe, a tabloid reporter lunged forward, cameras flashing. "Emma, did you manipulate your grandfather? Did you threaten him?" I stopped, faced the swarm, and replied steadily, "If loving the man who raised me counts as manipulation, then yes, I'm guilty." By the next morning, a blocked number lit up my phone. "Enjoying your fame?" My mother's voice slid through the line like ice. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because you took what's ours," she said coldly. "You stole our life. Now we'll take yours." Then the line went dead. That night, I sat alone in the study where Grandpa once taught me how to read contracts. His photograph rested beside the familiar leather journal. I opened it, my fingers tracing his fading handwriting. "When truth is tested, stand still. Let them strike. They'll only hurt themselves." I closed the book, drawing a slow breath. The fear remained, but beneath it, something stronger began to rise. Resolve. If they wanted a battle, they'd chosen the wrong Whitmore. When the first hearing arrived, the sky hung heavy and bruised, clouds pressing low over Los Angeles. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, hungry for blood. I didn't know whose reputation would die that day, theirs or mine, but I was done running. The courtroom carried the faint scent of polished wood and unease. My parents occupied the plaintiff's table, perfectly posed for the flashing cameras, my mother immaculate in a black dress, my father crisp in a navy suit. They didn't look heartbroken. They looked rehearsed, like actors mid-scene, performing vengeance for the crowd. As I entered, murmurs rippled through the room. "That's her, the granddaughter," someone whispered. My heels struck the marble with deliberate rhythm, though inside my palms trembled. Robert leaned toward me, his voice low and steady. "Stay composed, Emma. Let the facts do the talking." At the bench sat Judge Marcus Nolan, a man with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. His presence dominated the room even before he spoke. When his gaze met mine, a strange flicker of recognition crossed his face. Surprise, maybe disbelief. He took off his glasses slowly. "Miss Whitmore?" he asked, his tone unexpectedly gentle. "Step forward, please." My stomach tightened as I approached. The gallery fell silent. He studied me for several long seconds, then murmured, almost to himself, "You're Henry Whitmore's granddaughter." "Yes, Your Honor." A small nod, then a change in his expression, something like respect. "I clerked for your grandfather once," he said quietly. "He told me, if my granddaughter ever appears in your court, listen closely. She'll be telling the truth." Gasps swept through the spectators. Behind me, I could hear the crack in my mother's mask and the click of my father's clenched jaw. Judge Nolan straightened. "Proceed," he said, his calm voice now edged with conviction, the kind that warned everyone that honesty still had weight here. Their lawyer, Elliot Graves, rose with practiced confidence. "Your Honor," he began silkily, "this young woman isolated her elderly grandfather, interfered with his medical care, and coerced him into revising his will. We intend to prove deliberate fraud." Robert remained unruffled. "We look forward to refuting every falsehood, Your Honor." Graves turned, his smile sharp. "She seems remarkably composed for someone accused of stealing $1 billion. I met his stare, my voice clear and even. "Composure isn't guilt, Mr. Graves. It's faith in the truth." A low hum of approval rippled through the courtroom, the sound of an audience beginning to shift its allegiance. Even Judge Nolan's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Once testimony began, my parents' team threw everything they had: distorted emails, clipped phrases from staff reports, fragments of old correspondence twisted out of context. Each time, Robert met them head-on with clean records, precise timelines, and witnesses whose loyalty to my grandfather's integrity never wavered. But the most brutal blow came when my mother took the stand. Her trembling voice was flawless, every tear perfectly timed. "We only wanted to reconnect with our daughter," she said, pressing a tissue delicately to her cheek. "But Emma pushed us away. She cut us off from Dad. We were only trying to protect his legacy." Her testimony oozed pity, a performance honed to perfection. Yet all I could hear was Grandpa's warning whispering in my mind. Truth in the wrong hands turns to poison. Then it struck me. Poison only harms if you let it in, and I wasn't about to. By the second day, the trial felt more like war. Their attorney, Elliot Graves, strutted across the floor like it was a stage, waving papers and performing outrage for the cameras. But I hadn't come to act. I'd come to finish what they started. Robert rose slowly, composed as ever. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "the defense submits new evidence, medical evaluations, witness statements, and the late Judge Whitmore's personal correspondence. One document in particular deserves attention." At the word correspondence, my mother's back went rigid. She already knew. Judge Nolan gestured for him to continue. Robert handed over a thick folder, then turned toward me. "Miss Whitmore, please take the stand." My pulse thundered as I crossed the room, each step echoing in the silence. I'd rehearsed this moment countless times, but facing the two people who had both created and betrayed me made my chest ache. Robert placed a letter beneath the evidence camera. My grandfather's familiar handwriting filled the screen, steady, elegant, undeniable. To my dearest Emma, it read, "You were never my duty. You were my choice. If you ever stand against those who left you behind, don't meet them with hate. Let truth defend you. It always will." The room went utterly still. My mother's painted composure began to crumble. My father stared down, jaw locked. Robert's voice remained steady. These letters span 10 years, each one affirming Judge Whitmore's clear mind, affection, and conscious decision to leave his estate to his granddaughter. Elliot Graves shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. These letters are nothing but emotional theatrics. They prove nothing of legal significance." "Overruled," Judge Nolan said, his voice sharp and final. "The decedent's intent is exactly what this court is here to determine. Continue, Mr. Hayes." Robert gave me a subtle nod. My signal. I reached into my bag and withdrew the leather journal Grandpa had gifted me on my 16th birthday. Its edges were frayed, the spine cracked, each page softened by years of turning. "This," I said quietly, "was my grandfather's personal diary. He wrote in it every night until the week he passed." Flipping to the final entry, I steadied my voice. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was strong. "My son and his wife live for appearances. My granddaughter lives for truth. The estate must belong to her, not as a reward, but as protection. She carries my conscience where I no longer can." The silence that followed felt sacred, almost holy. Then my mother's composure shattered. "He was sick," she cried, leaping from her chair. "He didn't know what he was saying. She manipulated him." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Mrs. Whitmore, sit down," Judge Nolan ordered. Her words bounced off the wooden walls and dissolved into nothing. I turned toward her, the woman who gave me life but never love, and spoke softly. "No one manipulated him, Mother. He just finally saw you for who you really are. For the first time in years, I felt the truth settle inside me like armor. I wasn't their pawn anymore. I was Henry Whitmore's granddaughter. By the third day, time itself seemed to drag. Every cough, every whisper, every shifting chair echoed like thunder." I sat at the defense table, fingers locked tightly together, eyes forward. Across the aisle, my parents whispered frantically to their lawyer, their practiced confidence crumbling. Then the door opened. Judge Nolan entered, robes sweeping, his face unreadable. Instantly, the room stilled. He took his seat, adjusted the papers before him, and glanced at me, and for just a heartbeat, I thought I saw pride flicker in his eyes. "This court," he began, his voice calm but unyielding, "has examined all testimony, documents, and correspondence of the late Judge Henry Whitmore. What stands before me is not evidence of coercion, but of greed, misplaced and deliberate." A low stir spread through the gallery. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's fingers trembled visibly. "The plaintiffs," Judge Nolan continued, "have failed to prove undue influence. On the contrary, the record shows clear intent, mental soundness, and deliberate judgment by the deceased." He paused, letting his words hang in the charged air. "Therefore, the court dismisses the plaintiff's claims in full. The will of Judge Whitmore stands. The estate belongs to Miss Emma Whitmore." For a single, suspended heartbeat, the courtroom was utterly still. Then came the rush, pens scratching, cameras flashing, reporters gasping for sound bites. I didn't move. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. Judge Nolan turned his gaze toward my parents. "Justice," he said evenly, "does not belong to blood. It belongs to truth." The words hit like a blow. My father sank into his chair, shoulders collapsing beneath invisible weight. My mother stared blankly at the floor, her lips parted but empty of words. The gavel struck once, a sharp, final crack that sounded like the last shot of a long battle. When I rose, my legs trembled. Robert placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he murmured. "You did it." But victory didn't taste like triumph. It felt like ash, the quiet that comes after a storm, when the smoke still hangs heavy. As I turned to leave, my mother's hand shot out and clamped around my wrist. Her nails bit into my skin. "You think this makes you better than us?" she spat. "You'll regret this, Emma. You'll end up alone, just like him." I looked straight at her, my voice steady. "I'd rather be alone than hollow." I pulled free. Outside, sunlight flooded the courthouse steps, fierce and blinding, a light that felt like cleansing. The press surged forward, microphones thrust toward me, voices overlapping in a blur of noise. "How does it feel to win? What will you do with the money?" I paused halfway down the stairs, the wind off the Pacific tugging at my hair. "It wasn't about money," I said quietly, just enough for every camera to hear. "It was about truth." That night, I sat in the study beneath Grandpa's portrait, the verdict papers resting beside me. I whispered into the silence, "You were right, Grandpa. Truth really does have long arms." And today, it finally reached back. Weeks drifted by after the ruling, but peace didn't come easy. The media frenzy faded, the headlines moved on, yet the quiet that followed felt louder than ever. The estate was legally mine, the mansion on the cliffs, the companies, the fortune, but it all seemed hollow without him. The house felt more like a monument than a home. At night, I wandered its long corridors, past oil portraits and echoing floors, and could almost hear his voice woven into the stillness. Power means nothing if you can't live with your conscience. For the first time, I slept without fear, though not without sorrow. Then one evening, as the sun bled into the Pacific and painted the horizon in deep red light, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number glowed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A pause, then a voice, fragile, shaking. "Emma?" It was my father, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. The same man who had thundered accusations across a courtroom now spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, fragile, almost breaking. I read the journal," he said, the words halting. "Your grandfather's entries." I didn't want to believe them, but I couldn't stop reading. His breath hitched. He wrote that I lost my way, that I stopped being his son long before the will was signed. I closed my eyes. "He also wrote that it's never too late to do what's right," I said quietly. There was a pause, then a trembling exhale. "I don't deserve forgiveness, Emma, but I needed you to know. I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving you. For blaming you. For becoming the kind of father he warned you about." His words hung there, fragile, sincere, and unbearably human. Neither of us spoke for several long seconds. I gazed out the window at the garden, the one Grandpa had planted for Grandma so many years ago. The breeze rustled through the roses, and for the first time in a long while, the silence felt peaceful. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I finally whispered, "but I know Grandpa would have wanted me to try." He drew a shaky breath. "I'll take that. It's more than I deserve." Before the line went dead, he added softly, "You remind me of him, the way you never back down." After the call ended, I stayed there, staring at the horizon. The world had gone still again, but not with grief this time. With calm, with healing. I stepped outside barefoot, feeling the cool grass beneath my feet. The sun had slipped beneath the ocean, leaving the estate bathed in warm, golden light. In my hands, I carried Grandpa's journal. Turning to its final page, I read the words that had outlived him. "True justice isn't found in courtrooms, but in the hearts of those who keep believing in it." Tears finally came, soft and unhurried. "I believe, Grandpa," I whispered. "I always will." And in the hush of the evening breeze, I could almost hear his reply, gentle, proud, at peace. "Then I can finally rest, my girl." As the ocean wind drifted through the roses, it struck me with quiet clarity. Justice had been won long ago, but forgiveness, that was the real inheritance he'd left behind.